Welcome back, everybody, to the newest episode of Cake Bites. I am your host, Katie Cakes, and before we get started, I just wanted to make an announcement that I am going to be participating in the Extra Life Gaming Marathon again this year, and game day is on November 3rd. I'll have links available to my Extra Life profile page. You can go take a look. I really hope you'll consider donating. It's a really for a great cause for the Children's Miracle Network, and all the proceeds from my drive will be donated to the McLean Children's Hospital in Temple, Texas. So make sure you follow me on Twitch so you know when I go live, but it'll be at 8 a.m. on Saturday, November 3rd. Yeah. And for this week, I'm super excited to have David Doak on the show. Many of y'all may know him as Dr. Doak from the GoldenEye N64 game. He was one of the developers who worked on the game at Rare, and he also went off to eventually help create the TimeSplitters series. And he's on the show today to talk about working at Rare, working on the GoldenEye game, working on Perfect Dark, and then, going off and starting his own studio. So honestly, without further ado, here is David Doak. And I really think that the best place to start clearly is, I believe, with Rare. Or were you involved with games previous to working at Rare?
No, I mean I played games quite a lot, but I'd never really tried to make any. I guess when I was, I suppose I tinkered with stuff, but not seriously.
Mm-hmm. And so then what did you start at Rare doing?
So it was a bit of an unusual introduction to Rare. So I was, at the time, I'd finished a postdoc in science. So I was kind of like, I was a researcher and I was doing some teaching and stuff, university level,
mm-hmm.
and was playing playing video games, some online games and just some like SNES games and stuff and things. And I used to get Edge magazine, which was the kind of UK, kind of glossy, kind of upmarket games magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a Rare were recruiting, and they had a double page advert, which was artists and programs and things. But they also wanted the system administrator to look after. They had a Silicon Graphics network, so N64 required. Well, I think the art for Donkey Kong Country and stuff, and Killer Instinct, all that kind of rendered shiny art, which was kind of new at the time, was all done on Silicon Graphics machines, and they were also using Silicon Graphics machines for N64 development, and they were trying to recruit someone to look after them because it was quite an unusual skill, because there weren't very many of them around, and it so happened that I had been using those machines in research. We had a couple of them in the lab for looking at molecular structures on. So this is 1994, I guess, 94, 95, and at that time there was no 3D graphics on the desktop.
Mm-hmm.
It was the time. It was kind of like end of Windows 2, Windows 3, I guess, and if you wanted, 3D gaming was only really starting, and certainly it wasn't something that 3D graphics was.
So I actually wanted to ask, what were you studying? What was your postdoc in, and what was your research in?
So I did a degree in biochemistry. And then the latter part of my degree, I did some project work which involved computers. and then so my postdoc was protein structure determination, and at the time we used computers to look at the structures.
Mm-hmm.
So, used to back in the early days of that kind of stuff, people built physical models of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
which were very time consuming to build, and it was just moving into being a digital thing then. So I mean, and strangely, in the last year, I've kind of come back to working with that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, that's what I was doing earlier. I'm working on some VR stuff for looking at molecules.
Oh, wow. So that's really awesome that it's kind of gone full circle for you. Can you just talk a little bit again about how you got started at Rare because of the specific computer type that you were comfortable working with?
So there were so Rare were using. I mean, again at the time, people were starting to do lots of 3D polygonal modeling and rendering and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the graphics for the SNES games, Donkey Kong games, and Killer Instinct were rendered offline. So the sprites weren't hand drawn sprites; they were rendered sprites, and that was what gave them. I mean, that was when Donkey Kong Country came out. I mean, that was, I guess it was early 90s on SNES. It was quite a big step because the sprites in the game, even though it was a 2D game, looked very 3D because they were lots of rendered frames of a thing rotating and being animated in 3D. So Rare were doing that, and then also they were starting to develop for what was at that stage called the Ultra 64, which was the Nintendo 64 as it became. and the development kit for that was all based around Silicon Graphics machines. So Silicon Graphics were a really important company because they kind of, they were, I guess the early 90s, they were one of the first companies making hardware accelerated graphics. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people who worked at Silicon Graphics kind of went through into working for other companies like 3DFX and whatever. So there was a small, I guess they were West Coast America, and it was one of those times when there was a focus and a concentration of particular talent. And Silicon Graphics as a company doesn't exist anymore, but I think a lot of the people who worked there ended up doing fairly significant things. And the N64 was one of them. So Nintendo had partnered with them, and the N64 was built on Silicon Graphics technology. So they built the hardware.
And how did you leverage that into the position that you were in? Well,
it was strange because I took the job, and it was very. I mean, at the time, I guess Rare was probably about 80 people, I suppose. I think I was employee 85 or something. It was still fairly small, and so I went there and then had this job, which was just looking after the computers and making sure everything ran properly. And I'd only been doing it for about 3 or 4. Or even 3 months, I suppose, and I just kind of got sick of it because it was very strange to be working somewhere where they were, Rare, which was exciting because of the games they were making, but I wasn't actually making any games. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit like, I don't know, I think I've said before, it was a bit like being the person in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory who, just makes sure that the machines make sure the machines are working every morning, so you don't actually get to taste the chocolate or make the chocolate or do anything exciting stuff. So I was kind of looking for another. I was thinking I would leave, and I can't remember what happened. I think a friend who I'd been talking to had faxed me some information about a job, but they'd faxed it to the Rare fax. And it's quite interesting. I mean, Rare was a funny place because it was quite insular and isolated, and they were really. I just remember being called in. So, well, what's this? I said, well, I was thinking about doing something else. They go, oh, well, no, you mustn't. It was this weird. It was almost alien to them that want to leave. Anyway, and I said, well, and I got on quite well with people when I was there. So they said, well, what would make you stay? I think I said, well, it'd be interesting to be working on the games, but I'm not particularly a programmer or anything. But and then Martin Hollis, who was leader of the GoldenEye team, who had actually employed me in the first place, he'd interviewed me for the network job, said, well, maybe Dave can come and help out with this. So that's what I ended up doing. And then over the course of, I guess, probably within a couple of months, that ended up being all I was doing, because you just end up making a contribution to something. So it became more important that I was doing that than doing the other thing.
And even though like you say, you didn't have any formal programming experience or anything like that, what did you kind of fall into a role, or did it take you a while to find how you best contributed to the team?
Yeah, I mean, I did some programming, some logic programming, writing C code, but I was kind of learning it as I was going along, so it was a slow process. I was resourceful enough to learn how to do things, but it was generally slow. But what I did end up doing was kind of just designing, setting up the levels, and also the way that GoldenEye was made, you kind of needed to be able to code to set things up. Mark Edmonds, who was the main gameplay kind of programmer, had built this scripting system for setting things up, and it's all fairly technical. Mm-hmm. So I was quite happy to learn how to do that. So that became what I did. So and then pretty much I ended up just being the person who scripted the AI and set up the levels. It was a fairly small team. I think there's kind of about eight of us on the core team, and people's roles were very flexible. Mm-hmm. So if something needed to be done, then someone would pick it up. Particularly on those of us who were more technical in terms of had like I'd done the system administration stuff and things, and also a lot of coding is quite mathematical and scientific anyway. So you would just if something needed done, you would try and pick it up and get it done. It's in a way it was much more an environment like a modern indie studio would be.
Yeah.
So you have a typical indie dev. You've got less than 10 people maybe working on something, and because of that small pool, then you use whatever talent people have in whatever direction they can go.
Absolutely. And how long into the development process of GoldenEye were you introduced to the team?
So I think it was probably about a year and a bit in. So I can't remember exactly when it had started. Mm-hmm. When I first saw GoldenEye, which will be when I started working at Rare, it looked like a first-person shooter. So it had you could go around and shoot at characters in corridors. So the core engine was all working, but on top of that, there wasn't really much of a game. In terms of structure and design and levels and things. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And there were a lot of, it worked, but it had a lot of things that needed to be fixed. There was a lot of...
Absolutely. And the game was being developed at the same time that a movie was being produced. Like, it was kind of a...
Well, the goal... I think the goal was that the game would come out with the movie. Mm-hmm. But that went very awry because it took so long to do the game. But then I think also when Nintendo, as I understand it, when Nintendo had got the Bond license, mm-hmm. it was at a time when people didn't really expect licensed video game properties to be any. It was an afterthought, really. It wasn't that important a thing to the franchise. So Nintendo had got the license, and they didn't really have a plan for what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And the initial design, or the initial, what if for GoldenEye was going to be make some kind of 2D side scroller. So it may have been, and it may even have been a SNES game. And Martin, I mean, it's Martin's story more than my story, but I think Martin had worked on Killer Instinct and was also involved in helping Rare transition to 3D stuff. So he wasn't. I think he didn't have a team assigned to him at one point. And this Bond thing was floating around, and Martin liked Bond, and he said, "Well, could I work on that if it was a 3D game? Because I don't want to make a 2D game. I'm more interested in 3D tech." And they were initially going to make something in the style of Virtual Cop, so pre-scripted, moving around a level. I mean, the Virtual Cop games and House of the Dead and stuff. They're essentially light gun games. So it's a shooting gallery. So when GoldenEye was first put together, it was as a shooting gallery game, and I think it was shown. I think there was some early public showing of it, maybe at Shinkai Show or something in 90. And there's some video somewhere which is just essentially, it looked a bit like Virtual Cop.
If the game changed direction in terms of graphics, I'm assuming that there were other major changes in the original plan for the game as well.
Well, the graphic, I mean, it doesn't really make that much of a difference if you're moving around first-person shooter in a game to it being pre-scripted. The graphics engine is doing the same kind of stuff. A very interesting thing is that a lot of the things in GoldenEye which were seen as being innovative, such as location-based hits on the characters and characters who do things like run for switches who don't directly confront you, they actually dropped out of. If you I don't know if you played it, but if you go and play something like Virtual Cop, you'll see that it does have location-based hits. So headshots are more lethal than arm shots or leg shots or limb shots, and also you're often, when you come into an environment, I mean, it's all very heavily scripted, but within an environment you may have characters. There might be a character who runs off, so you've got a limited time frame to try and shoot them before they run off screen or something, because they're not all directly coming for you. So a lot of those things, and there's a design document that Martin had done, which had a lot of those things as kind of wish list features, and a lot of them ended up getting implemented. So, and they made, the kind of the model for a first-person shooter at that time was Doom. So, and Doom is essentially, you go through an environment which is a gated environment with some, coloured keys to unlock doors. And every time you move into a new part of the environment, all of the enemy setup in that environment just comes straight toward you and tries to kill you. That's how it works. So, but GoldenEye wasn't like that. So GoldenEye had, the AI did things when you weren't there. There were patrols and characters wandering around. Some characters were civilian characters. There was a lot more interaction with the environment. I mean, in Doom, there's very little interaction with the environment. In GoldenEye, almost everything you encounter explodes or breaks or something. So there was kind of like there was a shopping list of features, and we managed to get most of the things done.
And the multiplayer, if I remember correctly from what I was reading, that wasn't a feature that was intended originally for the game. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was very much a wish list thing, and we used to play in the team. We used to play a lot of Doom, not a lot, but a fair amount of Doom, and we really enjoyed. As a group of people, we really enjoyed multiplayer games. A game we used to play to death was Bomberman, the SNES, and just that whole kind of couch, everyone in the same space playing a game, looking at the same screen. So it was a thing we really wanted to do, and we knew that it was possible to do, but it was going to be work. And again, Martin cleverly scheduled the work so that Steve Ellis and Duncan Botwood, so Steve was programming, Duncan was doing design. We managed to get to a stage where they could be freed up from the main single-player game. And that was kind of in the last, I guess, 8 months or so of development. And they just were in another room as a kind of team of two, seeing if it was possible to get multiplayer working, which they did. I mean, it's in some ways it's not that hard, but in other ways it's incredibly hard because Steve had to go through all of the code in the game, which was designed to run in single player, and make it work in multiplayer, because it hadn't been designed with multiplayer as being something you could just switch on at the end. So it was a lot of very laborious work, and they did it, and it was largely it wasn't expected. It was to some extent concealed from management that we were doing it, but it's in a way. I mean, I'm sure GoldenEye would have in no way have had the enduring success if it hadn't been for the multiplayer. I mean, it was critical.
I think one of my favorite things is that you have an iconic. You're very iconic because of a character in the game named Dr. Doak after yourself. What led to the decision to put yourself in the game in a way?
So because I was doing the level setup, it meant that I had a lot of control over. I mean, there wasn't, other than the levels being modelled on the film, there was a fairly light brief as to how things would work, and a lot of my time was spent just trying to work out things that would be entertaining that matched the film. And one of the things was trying to. So as I said, a Doom level is essentially red, yellow and green keys or whatever, or blue. Yeah, you get the coloured key, and the coloured key opens the door. And the mechanics of that are very obvious because it's just it's coloured keys. So one of the things in trying to make the game more alive was finding ways to. We had there were gated parts in the game, but trying to make the unlocks a bit more interesting than just picking up a key. So a good example is shooting an unlock to open a door. That was an unusual thing to do, or having a computer or a terminal that you press a button on it and opens a door remotely and things like that. And we had this, the Dr. Doak character in the gas plant is just a key. I mean, you go somewhere and there is a AI character who gives you a door decoder, which is just a key, and then you go and use it. It's a key, but it's dressed up with some narrative around it, a very light narrative. Anyway, so one of the things in GoldenEye was that in modelling the characters, the decision had been made to use people's likenesses. So all of the faces you see in GoldenEye, other than the movie actors, are people from Rare. So we took pictures, and B. Jones, who was modelling the characters, put our faces on the heads. And all the heads are interchangeable. So that was one of the nice things with GoldenEye is that you can plug a head into any body and stuff and things. They're all because they're all low poly. So anyway, because the gas plant is like a kind of sciencey thing, and we had lots of science characters wandering around, and I was a scientist, so I had fixed it so that I would be the scientist head that guided me. And then in putting the text in, I put in Dr. Doak with the expectation that it wouldn't stay, because Rare didn't really. I mean, the Stampers kind of who ran Rare and owned Rare. It was a fairly I don't know, kind of people's names were in the credits for games, but there wasn't. The development teams were fairly invisible behind this monolithic thing, which was Rare. Mm-hmm. So my expectation was that I put it in because it was funny. It was funny the day I put it in because I knew other people on the team would look at it and then we would take it out. That was the expectation.
Mm.
And it didn't immediately get taken out, and then management saw it. So Tim Stamper saw it and said, "Okay, that needs to come out." and yeah, so there's a bit of naughty schoolboy about this. So having been told, we were expecting to take it out, but having been told we had to take it out made us want to keep it in, or made Martin. In fact, it wasn't me; it was Martin. I think made Martin want to keep it in. So it got changed, and then Martin changed it back again, I think. And then the next time Tim saw it, he was quite cross. But it was late on in development, so all of the strings and the text had already gone to be localized. So I think we said, well, we can take it out, but it might cause bugs, which is a bit ridiculous. And it got to stay in because of that. And it was always a bit of a bone of contention because it was, I think it did annoy management to some extent, but it stayed in. And then, of course, later when I left Rare, it was quite funny because obviously one of the you can screenshot GoldenEye and have a thing that says it's time to leave, Doctor. Interestingly, it's never been released, but when Microsoft did do a remaster of GoldenEye, because they remastered Perfect Dark for XBLA. And they were intending, and it did exist. I know I've spoken to other people at Rare who says it did exist. They did have GoldenEye working as well, but they could never get the rights cleared to release it because at that stage, so Perfect Dark was fine because Microsoft owned Perfect Dark when they bought Rare, but Bond license was more complicated because the license for GoldenEye was partly owned by Nintendo and then by Eon Danjak, who are the parent company of who licensed MGM, and also Activision were using the GoldenEye license at the same time, so it never got released. But when they did that remaster, they changed the name. I saw a thing about it. They changed the name of Dr. Doak.
To what?
To something else. Something. However, it never got released, so never mind.
That's what they get. And so, speaking of the licensing, I know you said that the situation was interesting because there was really not a lot of licensing in games. I read that one of the things that you guys ran into was using older Bond images, and you guys had developed like a game mode using,
as we understood it, the license that MGM, I guess, were the company who were involved in it, had given to Nintendo, was that we could use anything from the Bond universe. So which was great, particularly when you came to multiplayer. But also, I think it probably first came about because we wanted to have some of the other iconic villains, so Oddjob and Jaws and Mayday. So they were all in the game. And because of the way I think largely because of the way the heads worked in the game, as I said to you, you could interchange all of the heads. Mm-hmm. It was fairly trivial to put in Sean Connery and Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton as well, who were at the time, those were the three other obvious Bonds to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously now there's been other Bonds. So they were in the game as selectable characters. And we were pretty much unbothered by, if you're making something nowadays and it's a licensed property, there's endless amounts of interference from the people who are doing the licensing. I mean, in particular, I know some friends who worked on Disney stuff, and they just said it's just, you just want to kill yourself by the end of it, because anything at all that someone can take an issue with, they take an issue with just because that's their job. So but for GoldenEye, we never really had any interaction with MGM until quite late in development. Some guys came to check up on it.
That makes it sound like they showed up with like briefcases, fedoras, sunglasses, and suits. Like they came to check up on you.
I think there were three guys. It was almost like they'd kind of forgotten about it, and then they came along one day. And I remember, it's interesting. It's one of those things where I can remember what I was doing, because I just, at the time, I was setting up the Egyptian level, which has got Baron Samedi in it, the black actor from which one it is, the one with the kind of voodoo stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And he has the kind of skeleton face paint and stuff. Wears a white top hat and a big white ripped tuxedo, because I just put him. He was kind of the boss for this level, and we'd done this thing at the end of it where he comes up and he laughs at you, and we put in the Baron Samedi laugh. And I remember showing it to this guy from MGM, and he was going, "Oh, that's brilliant! That's just it's the kind of I don't know whether people use the word fan service in those days, but it's the kind of fan service thing that is nice." And we showed them all of the other Bonds, and there were two things that came out of that. One was that we couldn't use the other Bonds, and it was more to do with I think their feeling was that if the other Bonds were in it, then, and I think it's particularly Sean Connery they were wary of, that Sean Connery was very protective of his licensing and residuals and stuff and things, and Sean Connery's lawyers would certainly be wanting some money for him. Mm. And then if Sean Connery was going to get some money, then Roger Moore would want some money. so it was just I think it was just don't do that because it will open up some costs that we don't know, so don't do it. And then the other thing was that they just said this game's much too violent. So, to the extent that they really wanted to completely pull the teeth out of it and make it almost not violent at all. So they had this thing, which they said, which was that Bond. and again, it's to do with the times. I think it was. So this is it's the late 90s, and they were saying, well, Bond doesn't do in the game. Obviously, it's a first-person shooter. You can shoot someone, and there are death animations which look like they're hurt because they're dying, and when they're dying, you can shoot them again. It's just the mechanics of the game. And they were saying, well, Bond would never do something like that. Because they were kind of trying to change what Bond was. Mm. Because I remember having the conversation with people. I think me and Martin may have been involved in it, and we because we had trawled through all of the Bond films, reminding ourselves about what James Bond was like and stuff, things, looking for things to put in the game. Uh-huh. And then we say to them, well, he does do things like that, because if you look like I think in one of the early, particularly the Connery ones, there are some incidents where he just shoots innocent people. I think there's a particular scene. I think it's in From Russia with Love or something. Where there's Bond's somewhere, and there's this guy, and Bond just kills him. The guy's not armed even, and he just shoots him. Well, because he's got a license to kill.
The notion that a James Bond game with guns and some violence is too much is a little. It's a funny argument to have made.
I think they had. So Nintendo were also a bit twitchy about the whole thing because what had happened was you had gone from sprite-based games, which were largely drawn, two-dimensional sprites, to 3D games. So like Mario, Tomb Raider, Lara Croft and stuff and things, and now GoldenEye. But I think particularly in GoldenEye, because you could shoot people and the animations, the hit reaction animations, were for the time quite realistic. So it looked like they'd been hurt. I mean, there were a couple of fairly slow death animations which we had to change the timing off because they went on for too long. There were some concessions. The concession was that guy looks like he's rolling around on the ground suffering, so we don't want that in the game.
And they need to be clean shots only.
Yeah. So that was tied up, and we also had there's an interesting piece of censorship in the Japanese version, in that in the game, as well as the guns, there's a throwing knife and there's also a hunting knife. I can't remember what the hunting knife is in the final game, but it was a melee weapon. And just before, again, when we were going through lot check and testing in Japan, so it came out in Japan first, there had been a horrendous incident in Japan where somebody had been killed in a knife murder and decapitated or something, and it was kind of just in the news at the time, and we had a fax from, I think Miyamoto had been involved in it, and it was they really liked the game, but they were concerned about, and it had a really interesting kind of Japanglish translation. They were concerned about murder in the close distance. So murder in the close distance is what happens. It's like a melee attack. Oh. So they didn't like the idea that you could stab people. So it got taken out. I think the hunting knife got taken out, and I can't remember whether the hunting knife is in the actual game or not. But it was an interesting time because it was the time when it's funny looking back at it, because at the time I was pretty much of the opinion that you would just make it as realistic as possible. And we were just making it as realistic as possible. And over the years since then, I guess, being a parent is probably one contributing factor, but also just seeing as games got more and more realistic and violence could be portrayed in increasingly realistic ways, particularly melee violence. I kind of do, there's a kind of place for it. One thing I particularly remember from my own personal experience is playing, I think it was Grand Theft Auto 5 or something, and there was a bit fairly early on in it where you had to beat a guy up, and you can't shoot him because you haven't got anything to shoot him with, but you've got like a pipe or something and you can kick him. and it's one of the first, and it wasn't particularly gruesome, but it was. I'm playing a game where I've got this guy and I've hit him and he's down on the ground. I'm going to kick him to death, and so I'm kind of thinking, well, it's not really that insane. But it's funny. I mean, it's interesting, that whole violence and context, and does it? I mean, I don't think it desensitizes people. I think the kind of people it desensitizes are people who probably were desensitized already.
Absolutely.
I enjoy fiction and movies where violent things happen. They're important movers of plot and stuff and things. So yeah, I mean, I guess the realism is a big issue in games,
and that was an issue for them at the time.
And then it was an issue because we were kind of breaking new ground in terms of realism. Sorry, that's a big digression, but
but it makes a lot of sense. It's one of those things. I think that people look at early 3D graphics in the lens of 2018 or even just within the last 10 years, and they're like, oh, I can't believe people would say that GoldenEye was too violent. I talked to the guy who created the Rampage arcade game. And he said people were so upset because of the nudity in that game, which is literally the pixels of them transforming back into people.
Yeah.
It's like literally you couldn't create the genitalia if they wanted to, but people still freak out, you know. So it's really interesting to hear that at the time that was an issue. So, and you guys made changes to account for
Yeah,
that.
and we were also self-censoring to some extent because it's probably impossible to even ever see it again. But there was I remember seeing an early ROM, which is just a kind of research kind of build of GoldenEye, where Mark and Martin had tried to do particle blood.
Oh.
So yeah, particles weren't something. I mean, particles are everywhere in games now. Almost all of the dynamic effects you see, explosions and fragments and clouds and everything, leaves, are done with what's called particles. And it wasn't really a big thing back in that time. But Mark had done this thing where you shot the guys and they had this ridiculous arterial spurt of blood coming out, and it looked a bit stupid, but it was I think we could have made it better and less stupid or less unrealistic, but it was just kind of this feeling, well, no, that's just a bit over the top. Censorship, particularly the censorship of violence in games and film, I think is absolutely fascinating because it's a constant issue, but it moves around in very slippery ways. So if you look at something like an example I'm very fond of is the Lord of the Rings films. Mm-hmm. They're incredibly violent, mm-hmm. but they were allowed to be rated reasonably accessibly because they were seen as having some value outside of that, and it was I expect at some level money talked, and that's how they got those ratings. But other things which are equally as violent but don't have the provenance can end up being heavily censored. Yeah. We had similar. I mean, when we were making the TimeSplitters games, there was one point. There was, I think, particularly TimeSplitters 2, Future Perfect. I think it was Future Perfect. That was, at the time, there was a bit of a backlash against violent video games in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I think the game had an 18 rating in the UK. Oh. So a really high rating. And it was all to do with, they had a tick box list of things which were the criteria for censorship. And blood was one, and we had things like shooting the heads off zombies, but you'll have a list, and decapitation will be on the list. Huh. Wow. So you automatically, even though, and then you get into these ridiculous conversations where you start becoming a parody of yourself. So I remember talking to a guy once and saying, well, they're zombies. Obviously, you shoot their heads off because that's that's the trope. That's how zombies work. Yeah, if there was a zombie apocalypse, I would entirely be expecting to be out with a baseball bat knocking the heads off zombies. Mm-hmm. And if that didn't work, I'd be disappointed.
Right, exactly.
But then you come across as someone, then you come across as being someone who likes to chop people's heads off. But I'm not. I would never do that.
What was the feeling leading up to launch? It sounds like there was, the entire development process was a bit of a roller coaster. It was, and you guys were told you had to make some changes, things had to be taken out. What was the feeling leading up to the launch, and how was the reception for you guys?
The taking things out wasn't so much of an issue because there was only a few things had to be taken out, and they were easy to do, and it was kind of like you kind of go, oh, what a shame, but you do it. I think the biggest thing was that we all had been working on it. Certainly the last couple of years were very intense, and we all. And everyone who ever makes anything that they care about always thinks the same thing. We didn't think it was as good as it could be. All we could see were the warts and the ugliness and the broken things. And so, we were glad that it was going to be coming out and it was finished. But I kind of, it was tinged with thinking, well, this probably won't be received that well. Although when it was in testing, we got a lot of really good feedback from America, from NOA, so Seattle. They used to call themselves Treehouse, which was kind of their testing department there. And we had loads of feedback about people coming in and doing overtime at the weekends, playing the multiplayer just because they enjoyed playing it and stuff. So that was all good. But our general kind of thing was it was relief that it was finished. And when it came out, it didn't immediately do very well in terms of sales figures. In those days, sales figures were kind of a jealously guarded thing and were hard to come across, and we would kind of get it all secondhand. But it was, I think it had a very flat trajectory of sales. I mean, it's very different now. When a game comes out now, like something like Call of Duty or whatever, they aim to do 90% of the sales in the first month or something. That's kind of it's very heavily front loaded. But and also there's just so many things come out now, so you're only in the spotlight for a very short amount of time. Whereas if you go back to 1997, say with the N64, there weren't really that many releases in a calendar year, so things were more visible for longer. And GoldenEye came out and it just kept on selling, and the reviews were consistently very good. And then I think one of the things which, I don't know how true this is, but it kind of felt like it was true, was at that time there was still a very big rental sector. And I think the thing about GoldenEye was that if you rented it and played the multiplayer, for instance, it would be a thing that you'd be reluctant to take back to the shop, So it would lead to sales. A game which is a game which lasts for 5 hours and is very self-contained and has limited replayability outside of that. If you rent it and you play it, and you wouldn't consider buying it. Whereas, this had legs, so people who rented it probably went on to buy it.
And how long after the release of GoldenEye did you guys start working on Perfect Dark?
Pretty much immediately. I think we had we had been working incredibly stupid hours to finish it.
That crunch.
But the crunch, and it was, crunch is interesting because it's, in many ways we had self-selected to do it. In a small team, that if you're not there, then other people are carrying the weight. And we were all very proud of what we were doing, so it, you would stay, and we worked stupid hours. I mean, in particularly toward the end, people were consistently doing 100-week hours, and that's a lot of time. I mean, that's to do 100 weeks, 100 hours in a week. You need to be there 14 hours a day, so it doesn't leave you very much time to go home and sleep and things. And that's all you do, and it's 7 days a week. And it's interesting because you don't realise the damage you're doing to yourself. You're doing. We didn't. None of us had any responsibilities outside of the office, so we weren't. It was only ourselves. But it's funny. I saw it more when I watched Free Radical. But by that stage, I had children at home, and I was watching people who were working for me, largely doing crunch, and you could see that it wasn't good for them. But even when you tell people to not do it, they sometimes just go on and do it because they really care about the thing that they're doing. Anyway, so your question was about afterwards. So I think we probably had like a month or so of
So you got a whole lot of time to recover from that.
Working normal hours, yeah. We did, but it's a big thing. If you go from spending every waking moment trying to do something to it not being so critical, it does feel like a holiday.
Absolutely.
So we had some time off and time to think about what we were doing, but pretty much we had a whole, when you're trying to ship something, you get to a stage where even if you have a good idea, you're not allowed to implement it because it'll probably break stuff. So all of the feature creep and mission creep and whatever, you have to put out of your mind. But you still have those ideas. So there was we had a whole list of things we wanted to do. So Perfect Dark was a way of realizing a lot of those things, and then also just the fun of writing some new fiction as well. Was good.
And how long were you on that project for before you broke off?
So I guess it must have been a year and a half. So because GoldenEye came out in August '97, so we would have been finished, like a month or so before that. And I left Rare at the end of '98, I think November '98.
And had you already founded Free Radical, or you had an idea of what you wanted to do with Free Radical prior to, or like, I guess, are you comfortable talking about what pushed you to leave Rare and start Free Radical?
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally for me, I loved working at Rare. I didn't like the way the company was structured. So it was a family company. And it had it wasn't really a very glass ceiling because it was quite obvious. There were issues with kind of nepotism and stuff and things, just in the way it works. But I mean, we were probably being a bit idealistic about it because the world's not a fair place. But I think particularly, so the GoldenEye team was interesting in that we were our average age was higher than the rest of the company.
Oh.
Apart from management. So I was, at the time, I was 30 when GoldenEye came out. And a lot of the rest of the team were in the mid to late 20s. Because we'd all been to university, which was unusual. When Rare started, it was mostly people, who hadn't gone to college. I mean, they were clever people, but they'd gone straight into making games. And I think because of being people, I mean, particularly for myself, my contemporaries or people I've been to university with were moving into management jobs, and so at Rare, having done GoldenEye, I was off the mind. Well, I'd like to be doing something with a bit more responsibility next time. Whereas the view at Rare was, well, this team should just make another game. So there was friction there, just in terms of ambition, I suppose, and also, like I said, the crunch thing. It was a lot of time, and Rare wasn't. If they'd said to me, "Okay, go and take 6 months off now and travel the world, and then come back and do something," then maybe I'd have done that. But it was kind of very much, well, do the next thing.
Right.
So, and I guess the company did try to reward people in terms of money for royalties and stuff, but it was a very obscure system, so it was not something that was spoken about, and they didn't like people looking in other people's pockets. So, so that had been, I guess if that had all been more transparent, then that might have been, anyway. So just general things, and then also, the way it all came about was a little bit strange in that Martin Hollis, who was the team lead on GoldenEye, had similar feelings about things to the stuff that I've just described. And Martin did try to have some kind of conversation with senior management about it, which pretty much resulted in him getting fired. So Martin left a while before we did, because he started this conversation, and once he started the conversation, it wasn't allowed to go back in the box. So it was seen as a kind of disloyalty thing, I think, at Rare. We've given you this opportunity, and now you're being disloyal about it because you're asking for more or asking for it to work differently. So Martin left, and it was a very strange thing because we all had very onerous contracts, non-compete contracts. So if you left, you weren't allowed to do anything that competed for like a year or 2 years or something. Of questionable enforceability. So Martin left, and Martin was on what is called gardening leave. So gardening leave is when you're left a company, but they don't want you doing anything else, so they effectively pay you to do the gardening. You just sit at home. You sit at home and watch TV and get paid. Mm-hmm. So Martin was off on gardening leave, and was supposed to not be able. And it was very much, there was this kind of, the inside story at Rare, or the story that management put forward was, well, Martin is an example of why people don't leave, because he's left and now he's not allowed to make games. Mm. Yeah. But Martin then, so the non-compete was you can't work for a competitor. Yeah? Mm-hmm. But Nintendo weren't a competitor. So when Nintendo found out that Martin wasn't working for Rare anymore, they immediately offered him a job working on the development of the GameCube.
Oh, wow.
So because he'd been very closely involved with N64 stuff from an early stage and had made, arguably one of the best games in N64. So the idea of having him sitting close to the hardware development team in America and I think also in Japan was something. So anyway, he went and did that, which was quite fun. So that was his punishment. And I kind of when Martin had left, my heart wasn't really in some ways, and I just didn't like the way it was going. And I think I would have just left and not done anything else to do with games in some ways. But Steve Ellis, who'd become a good friend, when I remember Steve talking to me one day and saying, Martin was going to leave, and you're going to leave, aren't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, why haven't you spoken to me about it? I said, well, I didn't think you'd be interested. And that was pretty much what we did, pretty radical to do that. So and Steve was great, because Steve's a lot more driven than I am. So he was very good. If I'd just been leaving to set up the company my own, I probably would still be sitting in my underpants, because I prevaricate quite a lot and get distracted. But when Steve was involved, Steve was kind of, I'd left, and Steve was endlessly phoning me up and saying, have you done this yet? Have you done this? Have you spoken to publishers? Are you doing this? So Steve and then Carl. So we ended up with Steve and Carl, myself and Graham and Lee Ray. So four of us had worked on GoldenEye, and Lee was working on Perfect Dark as well. Off we went. and cold called a lot of publishers. And those were still the days when you could phone. It's quite funny. It now reminds me of Austin Powers. You know, when the bad guy's asking for the ransom and it's £1 million or something, or $1 million. Yeah, and everyone he's going, ooh, I need $1 million. And well, that's not really very much money. Well, when we were doing that, we were going around and we were asking for £1 million because we worked out what it was going to cost to make a game.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was going to be, 10 people or something for 3 years, whatever. And that was pretty much what we reckoned the cost was. And because we knew that's what it would cost, having just been close to development and Rare, and we knew what machines cost and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But, nowadays you couldn't really make very much for that amount of money.
Not at all.
Well, you could if you were indie. Indie's a different thing. But anyway, so we went, and that was interesting because we spoke to a lot of, cold calling people is a very interesting thing. Because I would phone places up and, publishers, it's like Activision and whatever, THQ, Eidos, whoever they were at the time, Acclaim, whatever. Mm-hmm. And you would sometimes just get, there's gatekeepers everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the gatekeepers are often not very clever monkeys. So you end up talking to someone and they're just wasting your time because they don't. And it's funny. I remember phoning Eidos and the guy who actually, Mike Suto, who was involved with some of the TimeSplitters stuff early on. He was kind of like a producer there. So I got through the switchboard and I got to him, and I just remember how, the guy's a clever guy because he spoke to me. And he just confirmed, you'll say you've left Rare, you will do work in GoldenEye, And I just remember him saying, okay, I've got your details, I will phone you back, I need to go and talk to someone senior here. So, we had a couple of deals on the table in the end, but it was interesting because that was just an example of someone,
mm-hmm.
of someone in a gatekeeper role who understood when they had to open the gate.
Uh-huh, absolutely. Were y'all subject to that same non-compete, starting your own company?
Well, we were, but we had some legal advice that it was unenforceable, so it didn't really matter. And then also, it's kind of weird because the time that it was going to take to make a game meant that by the time you did anything commercial or released anything commercial, then the non-compete time period would have expired.
Mm-hmm.
So, non-competes are... they're terrible. It's like software patents. It's the same kind of thing. They're just ridiculous things that shouldn't exist.
Right. It's like, yes, I will not get into it. It's just so the concept is very silly.
It's like, obviously you shouldn't steal people's stuff and pass it off as your own. But, if you have a skill set, even if you've learnt that skill set working in someone else's employ, they've already been rewarded for that. they don't own your firstborn.
That you know of. And so what was the timeline in starting TimeSplitters in starting after starting the studio? Because I'm sure acquiring the funding and everything took quite a bit of time, or maybe it didn't. That's why I'm asking.
I left Rare in, I think, the end of November '98,
mm-hmm.
and I know theoretical we started in an office on 1st of April 1999. Just because I remember the date, because we were just laughing about the date, and that was I guess the 5 of us. So we'd all we had funding in place, and we had the project, and we had computers, and it took a while. It probably took about 2 or 3 months to spin up from then, because also we had no idea what we were doing. There's a big difference in rocking up somewhere and it's your day job and all the stuff's there,
mm-hmm. and
being the person who's responsible for all the stuff being there. I think it's interesting because that's no longer, for game development, that's not an issue anymore because of the tools now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I said, I at home here, I've got a PC and some VR kit, and I can sit and mess around with Unity and things. And, the only thing that's stopping me from building a masterpiece is my own ability.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that there's a whole bunch of tools that I can't afford to buy. And very much in the 90s, the tools were really expensive. So the machines that we built GoldenEye on were really expensive machines. The software was expensive. It was all first-party stuff, so you had to sign your life away to use it and all this kind of thing. So I mean, that's one good thing,
mm-hmm.
which has changed a lot. But running a game development studio is it's not a bunch of laughs. I mean, it's fundamentally hard work because it's one of the things about it which is absolutely amazing is that it's creative work and making technology at the same time, which is, when it works well, is just a wonder to behold. But at the same time, you're endlessly having to make new things and make new tools, and the new tools sometimes mean that work has to be redone, and a lot of things are unknowable. I mean, a lot of human endeavor. Planning is hard.
Yeah.
Planning games is really, really hard. And I mean, I don't know that you get particularly any better at it. I think you get better at being more honest with yourself about where you are. I mean, that's one of the big things about trying to plan something, is to just not lie to yourself about unrealistic time frames and stuff and things and resources. It's better to just say we don't have the resources, so we won't be doing that, than to embark on it and then painfully later on find that you don't have the resources all the time.
And did you find that to be, like, as running a game development studio, did you find that to be more true as the head of the studio, or in the role that you were, versus being on the team at Rare?
It changed over the years. I mean, I think for the first couple of TimeSplitters games, I was very much on the team. But you do other things. I mean, I did a lot of the PR and the public-facing stuff and the contract stuff and things. You also, in a management role, you spend a lot of time dealing with issues, issues in inverted commas. And it's like, you think about, if you've got 50 people working for you, if somebody on average is deeply unhappy once a year, and you've got 50 of them, then that means every week someone's deeply unhappy. So so because of that, and so you end up having to deal with things like that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, sometimes it's absolutely amazing because because you're perhaps not directly involved in the design and the implementation process. It can be amazing just to see things apparently just appearing out of thin air, because you're not, you're there and people are working and stuff, and then you get to see it, and you don't see it in a very unfinished state. You see it when they've made it good enough to feel that they should show it to you, and I remember lots of instances like that where you just go, well, it was great. I mean, it's amazing to be working with people and to be allowed to trust them enough to let them go and on their own initiative do something, and then they bring it to you and they're proud of it, and you look at it and you think, you know what, that's better than I could have made. So that's the best bit. The worst bit is when they go away and come back and go, ta-da! And you go, that's a bit shit. And then, but you can't say that to people because that's not, because people don't deliberately make bad things. They might have made bad decisions or things out of their control might have twisted what happened. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting role managing things, and it's also interesting. Certainly over the years, I'd see people who were really good artists or really good programmers or whatever, and they'd want to have a management job, but they didn't really understand what the management job was. Because it's kind of you at that point you need to be saying to them, well, you really like programming or art. If you're going to be the senior artist or programmer, you're not going to get to do the thing that you really like because it's not that job. Mm-hmm. It's a different job, and that's a big challenge for any organisation. Is where do you recruit managers from? Mm-hmm. Because taking your best producers or craftspersons and making them into managers generally doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it works, but,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess, I just love the fact that you started at Rare in one position and you've just really grown. You grew through your roles, and clearly it's worked out pretty well. You are credited in the creation of one of the best Nintendo 64 games series, and then TimeSplitters itself is widely acclaimed. People love the series. And can you speak on what you think, or what about the TimeSplitter series really struck people at the time that it came out?
At its core, particularly for Steve and myself, it needed to play well. So it needed, there's no, and frame rate and responsiveness of things. And then on top of it, we were building the game that we would have wanted to have. Mm-hmm. So a kind of design pillar, we never sat down and wrote these things out, but I would say a design pillar of TimeSplitters was that it just wanted to be this kind of chocolate box of stuff, which was where all the genres came from, and the kind of different tropes, the sci-fi and the gangster and the Wild West and all that kind of stuff. And then also with things like the map maker and the character choice, just to have it that it was intended to be a game that you would keep and would continue to be fun once you'd kind of gone through the structured content, which in the first case was very light. There wasn't really a story the first one and stuff and things. So that was and it didn't take it and it didn't take itself too seriously. I hated. It's funny. I grew up playing kind of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, and certainly my experience has been that a lot of people who are good game designers have done that. Because I think that if you're going to sit down and DM some role-playing thing for 3 or 4 hours and entertain some people, you really need to have your wits about you.
Absolutely.
And you've also got to be able to respond and read other people's engagement. So, if people are bored, then you need to switch it up, or, you need to just, and I think if anyone was asking me how to learn game design, I would say go and do that for a bit, because you'll get good at seeing when things don't work. And so how did I get onto that? I guess I
was talking about how TimeSplitters being, very unique, and people were drawn to a lot of different aspects of it.
Okay. So I see what I did. So although Yeah, so although I really like role-playing and RPG stuff and things, and traditional kind of pen and paper, Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of it is incredibly, at its worst, it can be so claustrophobic and nailed into some little channel, and have no sense of humour. So a lot of the old, some of the old TSR game kind of like dungeons and stuff and things, they're just obsessed with the rules and the mechanics of it and not the fun. So TimeSplitters was a shooter where anything could happen, and if something could happen and it was funny or entertaining or distracting or pretty in some way, then you would just do it, and it wouldn't matter if you had to suspend disbelief or step outside the trope or whatever. So that was it. Had that anything goes. It was which was always interesting, not interesting, but painful, engaging with marketing and publishers with that, because it wasn't a narrow enough thing for people. I mean, particularly with EA, we had a lot of unpleasant conversations with them where they would just say, we don't know how to sell this. It's like, well, we don't know how to sell this because it's just got too much variety. Well, there you go. Maybe that's how you sell.
Right? You can tap multiple markets all at one time.
Yeah.
That's so silly.
But a lot of it's in nowadays with things like League of Legends and Dota and Overwatch and stuff. I mean, those things to me, if you look at the character design and the rosters and stuff and things, they scream the same design principles as TimeSplitters. It's all about variety, and also variety with a lightness of touch and some humour about it, which for a while shooters went down. Certainly kind of late 90s, early 2000s. There was a lot of very narrow militaristic stuff in shooters, and I think also we used to get it all the time from, again, marketing people, because they, wrongly to my mind, had this idea that the market was the kind of teen 20s male stereotyped video game nerd, because that was the market they thought they were selling to. And even if it was that market, they were belittling those people because they were thinking, well, they're just looking at it going, oh, well, no, what you like is Space Marines. So, well, yeah, Space Marines are good, but
not like 50 times.
Not like 50 times, yeah. and you just see this. I think it's nice to see that at least now, even the mainstream in the video game industry is mindful of that era and does try to stay away from it a little bit. However, it does still get caught in ruts where they just rinse and repeat until it's dead. Because it's caution, it's the sequelitis and caution and all of that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, because indie dev is such a, I pretty much only play indie games now. I don't got PS4, but I don't really go and play a lot of the big titles. I'd rather play something which is just going to completely blindside me with something quirky about it.
I'm the same way personally.
It's great. I mean, you look at things like again, now you can just watch Twitch streams and Let's Plays of stuff and things. But like God of Wars and Last of Us and Horizon Zero and amazing, absolutely amazing, wonderful. But I've played those games already. There's reskinning and there's some new mechanics and stuff and things, but by and large, I don't have 50 hours to put into something like that. I'd rather just like, for instance, I think I played to death recently was Celeste.
Oh.
And I don't really like platformers, but it was just I just thought it was absolutely charming, and it was always giving, even in terms of gameplay, it was always giving you something, because it was always like, oh, that level looks like it's impossible, but it mustn't be impossible because.
Mm-hmm. So, can you talk a little bit about what it was like, that first game that you guys worked on, the first TimeSplitters? I'm sure that as a new studio, you guys had worked together as a team, but the dynamic was different. What was that like? Were there any major challenges?
It was hard. It was actually quite hard to find new people. I guess we had quite high standards for what we wanted from people, and we're probably naive in thinking that we'd be able to get those people easily. So, although I think we did make Free Radical, I think always hired well. I mean, when it got toward the end, when we were having to just ramp up teams, I think probably it gets harder, but then also, the hiring at the start was generally done by the principals in the company, so we were more focused on what we were doing. It was a lot of fun. I mean, making the first TimeSplitter. I mean, it was just, it had all the excitement of making a game, but plus the excitement of everything was new. So everything about doing the company, I mean, some of it was very frustrating, but because it was new, it was interesting. And we were also, again, largely through Steve's ambition, we were driven about trying to hit the PlayStation 2 launch, and managed to do that when a lot of people failed. But that was just because we were agile, because we were small. We could do things other people couldn't do. It was fun. I mean, it wasn't. I think we all managed to get on quite well throughout. And we were driven. We kind of had this, I guess, the kind of albatross on our shoulder was that we really wanted to not fail, because it was having a lot of spin-offs from companies disappear. They all come out and it's all going to be amazing, and having put ourselves in that frame was a lot of personal ambition to show that we could do it.
And going from the Nintendo 64 to the PlayStation 2, developing for it, was there a huge difference in the dev kits or the way you guys had to approach that development? Yeah,
I mean, it was very different, but I mean, Steve Ellis was entirely the person who made it work. I mean, Steve's very, very talented programmer, very talented technically, and I mean, and single-handedly, he just, set about the coalface and dug, but was doing great things, outperforming other teams of people. There was just really him doing it. So, and then we had some really good hires. So Hassett Zala, who is now at Dambusters, with the people who are probably going to end up doing the next TimeSplitters if it happens. He was one of the first people we hired, and Hassett was, again, a really good hire. I mean, at a time when if we'd got the wrong person, it could have been disastrous. But he was great technically, and then we had a couple more people from Rare. So James Cunliffe, who did the animation and stuff, was brilliant. It's interesting. Well, I think I said this to somebody the other day. Free Radical now, the kind of alumni of Free Radical, the people who've ended up at other companies, a lot of them have ended up in really good roles in big games companies around the world. And most recently, I think there are about 5 Free Radical people at Valve.
Oh wow!
Which is quite a bit, because Valve's not that big.
So
good. I mean, that's yeah.
I was just saying maybe they're the team working on Half-Life 3. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't like to be part of the team working.
I was gonna ask about, in addition to the 3 TimeSplitters games, you guys released 2 other titles. One was released between 2 and 3?
Yes, yeah, second time.
And did you guys was there a specific team working on that game?
Second time. Yeah, so that was that was an interesting time because that was it's a big step to try to be doing 2 things at once. And Second Sight was a large part of the TimeSplitters 2 team. So yeah, and then yeah, but you're always, I mean, that's an interesting thing because also you're dealing with people's personal desires to be on a particular project. Mm-hmm. But I think we managed it quite well then. I mean, Second Sight was. I mean, I'm very proud of the game. I think it's a great game. Mm-hmm. It has issues, but I particularly the story and stuff. I was involved with a lot of that. So, but I think we did a good job. And then, I mean, I don't know what's your next question. And then post Future Perfect, we ended up doing Haze, which was pretty much a disaster.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, it's funny looking back on it because so with TimeSplitters, I mean the story starts with TimeSplitters because we were disappointed with how well TimeSplitters 2 did when it was published by IDOS, mm-hmm. and then we were approached by EA, so we ended up doing TimeSplitters 3 with EA, and that was disappointing as well because even though those games both have incredibly high Metacritic ratings, they didn't sell as well as they ought to have done. But a lot of that is to do with the relationship between an independent developer and a publisher, because the publisher, they'd rather sell more of their own thing mm-hmm. than sell your thing. So there's a conflict there, which is never going to go away. Anyway, so on the back of that, it was also the kind of the generational switch because X360 and PS3 were coming. And we were looking for new people to partner with, and we spoke to a bunch of people. I mean, we spoke to a lot of people, and everyone wanted us to do. Looking back on it, we should have been more adamant that we wanted to do more fun things. Mm-hmm. But it was a time when everyone was saying, oh, everything has to be much more realistic on these new consoles, and it'll be more gritty, and it'll be more... So if you're going to do shooters, they're going to be more militaristic. We can't sell this silly stuff with monkeys and zombies and things. And we should have just... I don't know. With 2020 hindsight, I think probably what we should have done was just gone a bit turtle and waited it out. And maybe just gone on and we could have still made more stuff on PS2 and things. Mm-hmm. But what we ended up doing was, well, switching to deciding that we should make something a bit more gritty and a bit more realistic, mm-hmm. and also deciding that we should build a whole new set of technology. So a whole new engine for PS3, X360. And we completely underestimated the resource it would take to build the technology. But pretty much 90% of the games industry made the same mistake. If you go, so that this is, I guess, what is this? Is like kind of 2002, 3 or something, I suppose, 2004. I mean, the reason the Unreal Engine is as big as it is now dates from then. Because at that point in time, people used to build a new engine every time they were making a game, pretty much. But then if you were a kind of a first-party studio, so like in Nintendo or in a big publisher like Ubisoft or something, they would have their own internal teams building engines, building technology. And that was pretty much how people did it. So the team that built the game built the engine. But it's quite a risky process because building the technology takes a lot of effort. The transition to PlayStation 3, X360, a lot of teams completely screwed up and couldn't build the technology because it was quite a big. There was quite a big change. It was all shader based, and there was just a lot of stuff was changing, and complexity and stuff. And what happened to Free Radical was we were building a new engine and rewriting a whole bunch of stuff, and it didn't go very well. So that meant that if you're on the back foot with the technology, it completely compromises all of the artistic and creative side of it as well. So Haze was a big fight to do all those things. But because we were the independent studio under contract to, a game publishing contract, it was very hard for us to go and be honest about that. Because you can't go and say, this thing that you've just given us. You just signed up for several $1 million to do this. Well, it's going wrong. Yeah, because the minute you say it's going wrong, then that it invokes a whole bunch of contractual issues. In the case of internal studios, it's fine to say it's going wrong because obviously, you're the same company, so you can work out what to do. And at that point, one of the things that rescued a lot of those development teams was Unreal Engine. Because at the time, Epic were starting to commercialize Unreal Engine as a third-party solution for making games. And Epic did a brilliant thing there, which was, the thing that they were building, they got other people to make it better for them. Because everyone, and that's why when you look at games now, most AAA stuff is built on engines, and one of two engines pretty much now, Unreal and Unity. So you look at Rare. So Rare's Sea of Thieves. It's Unreal.
Yeah.
That's Rare. That's Rare, who always built their own stuff. and also it's Microsoft. So Microsoft doesn't have a solution. Microsoft is using a third-party solution. Anyway, so that, I don't know if that's who was leading, but I think that was a big issue for us. Was I think we didn't have the confidence to stick to doing what we wanted to do, which was making light-hearted, fun things. So we got dragged into, not dragged, but in order to try and remain viable, we started to make something more realistic, which is what Haze was. And also we just had a massive misfire on the technology.
So, and that was all with Haze, right? Is what you were saying, right? And we were talking earlier about the indie scene, a little bit about how with all of the programs and stuff available, it's streamlined more now than it used to be. And what you're talking about, it's crazy to think that AAA development is also streamlined in a way now with the commercialization of things like the Unreal Engine.
So I imagine things like that. I don't know what Naughty Dog use, so I like the other big kind of gorillas in the room are like Sony first party development, and I'm sure they must have. It would just be prudent for them to have some kind of internal solution.
Was there any talks in porting TimeSplitters from the PS2 to the PS3? I mean, was that an option for you guys?
That was all quite depressing because, I mean, Sony, I don't know whether they're better now, but Sony used to be a kind of weird kind of Hydra setup. You know, there was Sony America and Sony Europe and Sony Japan and lots of little empires and stuff, even within Sony Entertainment. And we wanted to do a PS3 version of TimeSplitters. We wanted to do PSP versions of TimeSplitters. And always with Sony, it was, well, you know, you've got to do something innovative with the technology. And we were saying, well, no, we just want to port it because it'll sell. And again, you know, in retrospect, you know, a bit annoying because they then did the same thing with a lot of their own stuff. Like I'm particularly looking at Shadow of Colossus and things like that. Well, you know, it for some reason, the reason is that it's internal. It's okay to just do straight ports of things if it's your thing. If it's somebody else's, but if it was us, it was like we would be held to a different set of criteria. And that's a shame because I think possibly if we'd been involved in doing things like ports of TimeSplitters and keeping it going like that, the company wouldn't have failed because we would have had more things on the go. So,
I guess, can you explain a little bit what happened with Free Radical and what you ended up doing afterwards?
I would just recommend you don't ever work with Lucasfilm. That was interesting. They came to us. And said, we want someone to make Battlefront 3 and we think you're the people to do it. And we looked at Battlefront 1 and 2 and said, yes, that looks like something we could definitely do and that'd be a great thing to do. We were kind of, again, we were a little bit on the back feet because Hayes wasn't going wonderfully well. And we'd always said it was best if we owned our own intellectual property, but if you're going to work with a licensed intellectual property, then you might as well work with a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was also, you know, when we entered into those deals with LucasArts, it was morale-wise, it was brilliant for the company. I mean, everyone. I mean, I'm actually personally not a big Star Wars fan, but you know, so many of the people who work for us were massively. You know, you don't have to go very far in a game development studio to see a whole bunch of Star Wars toys lying around, stuck to monitors and stuff and things like that. So it was a great thing. I mean, there's a lot of things went wrong. I mean, we were still trying to get our technology right. The scope of the game went crazy, but that was largely due to some very unrealistic ambitions coming out of LucasArts. And then LucasArts also self-destructed because, I mean, look, you know, we didn't know at the time, but if you look back at it now, it's clear that Lucasfilm was grooming itself to sell to Disney. So they were doing a lot of things. Yeah, they were cutting things internally and trying to get the house in order for that sale, and we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, we were struggling to some extent with the development, but I think it would have been fine if it hadn't ended up being it ended up being quite unpleasant.
And what was the series of events kind of as that was collapsing? I mean, that wasn't your fault, but you guys were kind of
I mean,
pulled in.
if we had been if everything had been going splendidly well with the development, then we probably might have survived it. But it was like any development process. There were a lot of unknowns and there were a lot of issues. But I mean, internally at LucasArts, they sacked all of their senior management and put in a whole bunch of people who were, I don't know, pretty much psychopaths as far as I could make out. And then we had to go and talk to them and be shouted at by them for a few months, and it was very unpleasant.
What did they yell at you guys for?
Well, I mean, it
was.
Well, they were yelling because the game wasn't ready, or it hadn't met the ambitious goals that they had. But I think really at that point they just wanted to be out of the contract because they were, because subsequently they shut LucasArts down.
Yeah.
LucasArts doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So that was, that was, I think that was part of the goal. I mean, I think they saw LucasArts as being something that lost money, and we were some independent company that LucasArts was spending money with.
And so, what happened to Free Radical Design when, did they got reacquired by somebody else, right?
So I wasn't involved. So
okay.
so by the I mean I never, it was never properly something that I had diagnosed or whatever, but I pretty much had a nervous breakdown coming out of that.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, I guess so how long ago is it now? It's 10 years ago now. I mean, it was a big thing because I did all of the things that you shouldn't do, which is to be in denial about it, which just makes it worse. So that was, in the end I left Free Radical because I just couldn't do it anymore. And that's a very hard thing because the company was in jeopardy at the time. So you're kind of, you have a thing that is your thing that you've built and you feel a lot of responsibility to people, but also, you've got responsibility to yourself, not to drive yourself off the cliff. So it was very traumatic, and took I don't know, probably something you never get over, but it took a long time to even be able to talk about it or think about it. But and then the company went into administration. So because LucasArts, I mean, as I understand it, I mean, I wasn't directly involved in the end of it, but we had good contracts. We had strong contracts with them, but a contract doesn't mean anything when you're facing a company which has got that amount of financial clout. We could, there could either be some compromise, or you could go to court with them, and going to court with Lucasfilm in San Francisco when you're a relatively small company in the UK is not an option, because you would just be bled out.
Yeah,
it would never go to judgment. You just would you'd lose before you started, because you couldn't ante up to stay in the game. So and that meant, Free Radical, a lot of people lost their jobs because they were on, we had hired a lot of people to make those games, and then the money to make the games went away. It went into administration. The other principals, Steve and Carl and Graham, stayed with the company a bit. It was bought by Crytek, and never really, did some stuff. They worked on the multiplayer part of Crysis and stuff and things, but I think at that point it was probably hemorrhaging talent as well, because people who were, a lot of people left then. But interestingly, people stayed for a while. People had, there was some kind of familial responsibility people felt to it. You know, there were good friendships, and a lot of those guys still stay in touch. But it's a very hand-to-mouth existence that running. You know, there aren't very many independent developers like that anymore, because it's all you need to do is misstep ever so slightly, and it can all go very badly wrong. And if you look at internal studios, look at what happens, or what has notoriously happened a number of times, is you get these horrendous hire and fire cycles where they get a whole bunch of people and promise them, you know, proper permanent jobs, and then once they've worked themselves to the bone shipping something, they fire them all. It's a hard model, because you need the big production team to get through development and to finish something and to create all the assets. But actually, you need very lean, agile teams to plan things out. And also, the teams who are planning things out need to be experienced people. You need to be people who've... It's bizarre. I mean, I'm not involved in any of this anymore. But I think I'd be quite good at it, because I've seen it go wrong. Because you don't really learn very much when things go well. You learn unrealistic expectations.
Right.
It's I don't know. I can't. And now it's, you know, with outsourcing and stuff, I can't imagine what the management is like in running. You know, I don't know. So I'm always incredulous when I look at, say, Ubisoft are a good example. You know, look at the Assassin's Creed games. I mean, they are enormous. Just in it. Even just looking at the art assets, it is an enormous task. And a large part of that stuff is outsourced. And when you outsource something, you always, every step it's removed from you, you lose control over quality. It's astounding that those things get made.
The state of... like the amount of games that are being released every year now. I've only got 26 years of, I guess 21, maybe 20 solid years of gaming under my belt. So not a whole lot compared to some people, but I just feel like now there's so many huge games coming out. I mean, you look at things like E3. And you know, they're showing a lineup over a couple of years. But when you've got them showing the like Bethesda, for instance, you know, they announced Fallout 76 a couple of months ago, and it's going to be coming out soon. And you know, Fallout 4 was crazy huge. You know, those RPGs are insane to me, and I just can't even imagine, like in Grand Theft Auto 5, like you talked about earlier. Los Santos's map is huge. All of the content that needs to be generated for that amount of space in game is just, it blows my mind. But that was really off topic for me.
But it's the amount when. So I remember when even kind of PlayStation 2, as someone making games, I would expect to have played, at least to some extent, all of the significant games. You know, so in a year, there were probably 20 things that you really ought to have played, and they would be across different genres as well. So, you know, like I would play RTS and some sports games and stuff and things, just because they were good examples of craft, of design craft and stuff and things. It's just not possible anymore. You know, and also the kind of like you say. I mean, Fallout and GTA are good examples. I don't know what percentage of people playing those games encounter all of the content. Mm-hmm. It must be very small. So Fallout 4, I think I gave up on Fallout. Fallout 3, I gave up on when the X360 scratched the disc, which was a bit of a show. And I did that thing of never being able to get back. But I remember it. I remember playing it and spending many a happy hour, blowing things heads off in the wasteland and whatever, and following some of the little obscure story arcs and stuff. But it's weird. I mean, games. There aren't. Well, I can't really think of another creative art where people create so much content which they don't expect most people to encounter. If you write a book, you expect people to read it all. If you make a film, you expect people to watch the whole film. If you create some visual arts thing, you expect people to go and look at it and not look at just the corner of it. But games, what big games ask of the player is insane compared to most things. It's like, well, and it's a really hard thing to explain. I mean, I've some good friends. One friend in particular who we enjoy talking about books and films and stuff and things. He's not a gamer, and it's interesting trying to a good example, and it's not even really that big a game. Is we had been my generation, so I grew up in the 80s. Mad Max was a really big thing, so I've got incredibly strong memories of when Mad Max 2 came out because there had not really been anything like it, and it was transformative, and it was a big cult hit. So when Fury Road came out, my friend Tim and I went to see it, mm-hmm. And I thought as a modernisation and recreation of that whole vibe and trope, it was wonderfully done. So about the same time, the game came out. I can't remember what it was called. It might have even been called just Fury Road. It was the Mad Max kind of open world game, and I really enjoyed playing it. I mean, it's got problems, but as a evocation of that driving around the wasteland and doing things in your car, it was really good. But I couldn't explain to Tim. I showed him it. I said, "Well, this is this game, but I can't really explain this to you because you kind of need to have played it for 20 hours to get it." It's like, I can show you here's driving from A to B, but you're never going to have the experience of driving from A to B and wondering whether there's something there or thinking about your upgrades or all that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. because you need to have played the game to do that. And it's a weird thing because it does take, for most games, like something like Breath of the Wild. I mean, I played that, enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I didn't finish it because I got sidetracked doing something else, and then had that thing of going, you must have had that experience of, something like that, like an open world game, mm-hmm. big narrative and stuff, and you're 60-70% of the way through it, and you pick it up every day and play it, and then you put it down for a week, and you go back to it, and you can't remember what you were doing or how to play the game, and it's all very confusing.
I wish games would come with like a notes option, so you could like leave yourself something to when you load it back up. You're like, oh yes, okay, cool.
Well, it's just the little quirks of that. I think Breath of the Wild I left off in the middle of some boss fight. which I'd been hammering away at it, and I'd pretty much got it, and then I played it and nearly got it and didn't get it, and then thought I'll just leave that. Mm-hmm. And of course, came back, and a week later I had no skills, so I was just getting spread around because I just couldn't even remember what the buttons were, or I didn't know how to go and make myself some kind of mushroom stew that was going to see me through the battle, or where to get a fairy from it.
So after Free Radical Design, you left.
Yeah.
What was the series of events after that? Were you still involved in making games? I know that currently you're lecturing. You're a professor.
Well, I'm not a professor. I do some teaching.
Oh.
Yeah. I live in rural North Norfolk in the UK. I've done various things. I mean, mostly to do with for a few years I did a lot of helping out teaching primary school kids. Oh. Because my girls were at school, and I was doing voluntary stuff and some other stuff. I enjoy doing that. Teaching, I mean, science and computing and things. And computing's interesting because kids are very game literate. Mm-hmm. I mean, they play a lot of games. I mean, when I was that age, there weren't really any games to play, but it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think it's a shame that it's coming through, but teachers, I mean, games to me are something that it's probably worthwhile everyone knowing about, and I mean not just computer games, I mean board games and stuff and things, because a lot of what games do is to provide a engaging way to spend leisure time. Mm-hmm. People choose to play games, and that's a really interesting thing, because when you try to define what a game is, often a game looks very much like work, but it's kind of work that people voluntarily undertake to do. Mm-hmm. Like a board game, for instance. If you're going to play a board game with a group of people, and you're the person who's going to be learning to play the game and explain it, it's a massive amount of work. Mm-hmm. But you do it because of the social interaction and the pleasure of interacting with the game and managing the game systems and stuff and things. And when people, like children, when they play games, they can be quite discriminating about whether a game is rubbish or not. And I enjoy, like, working with kids, like teaching them some kind of programming. There are some nice visual languages they can learn and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they often want to make gamey things. They want to make gaming machinery, and I want to be able to control this or make these things happen. And that's really good, because it's a platform for them to learn other skills, because they'll learn technical computing skills, or they might need to learn maths, or they might need to learn things about narrative and story, things that traditionally would be taught in more formal ways. Right. So, and it's, I think it will change, and it is changing. It's wrong to say it's not changing. But as more teachers are aware of that, I think it provides an interesting way for teaching, interesting mechanics for teaching. Because it's weird. It's if you look at it, very traditionally, a teacher could be going to a class of kids and saying, "Well, here's a book which I've really enjoyed, so we're going to look at the book." And that's a valid and useful thing to do, to critique the book, to read the book. So it's a leisure activity which is permissible to bring into a classroom environment. until fairly recently, the idea that you would say the same thing about a game would have been laughable, because games were, in some quarters at best considered harmful.
Mm-hmm.
Video games. I mean, video games have got a terrible reputation in some parts of society, but yet loads of people play them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's changing. I used to say it's like, it'll be interesting when you can go to a dinner party and it's okay to talk about the games you've been playing. Because it's okay to talk about the films you've been watching and the books you've been reading. But people, it's a massive sector of entertainment, and it's a massive arena that people put their valuable leisure time into.
Mm-hmm.
And also because people naturally have. I mean, I think when you're playing a game, because you engage with a game in a way that you don't engage with something more passive, like, say, a film,
Mm-hmm.
People develop their own critical awareness of it and their own expectations, and people will say, they'll pick something up and will go, you know what, I don't really like that. I don't like the way this works. I'm not going to play it because I think this part of it's broken. These controls don't work well. It doesn't reward. So they're involved in some critical dialogue with the thing in a way that often they aren't with other things. On TV, I'll just watch it anyway. It's not very good. Why are you watching that? Oh, I don't know. I'm just watching it because people don't often play games in that way. They'll go and play something else.
It's hard to force yourself to play through, because your brain is actively engaged with that form of entertainment. Like,
yeah,
I can be channel surfing and I'm like, man, there's nothing on. So I, whatever the best thing that's on may be pretty bad overall, but comparatively it's the best option. So fine, I guess I'll watch it, and then people are a lot less apt, I think, to just throw their active brain engagement at something they don't enjoy.
Yeah, and they often have opinions. I mean, they often have opinions about how to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, which is good. I mean, that's engagement, isn't it? It's
Mm-hmm.
What's not to like about that?
Right.
And a thing I've seen firsthand. I mean, this is a particular example of it, which I think is a strong example. Is if you working with, say, primary school children, so children who are kind of they're maybe about 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're beginning to develop. They're beginning to move beyond just arithmetic in terms of maths and stuff and things.
Absolutely.
So kids like that, they're starting to do algebra and coordinate geometry and things like that. And often it's taught to them in a fairly dry way. But I've seen the same children who, because they're trying to make a character move or a gun shoot or something in a video game, will patiently engage with much harder maths, because the goal is something that they've subscribed to. It's their own self-directed goal. I want to make this character move around and jump and squash and stretch or whatever. So therefore, I'm quite happy to learn all of maths, as opposed to just doing the maths for the sake of it. It's very interesting.
And so, this is very recent. I stumbled upon this this news, and it was about THQ Nordic acquiring the rights to the Free Radical design games, including the TimeSplitter series and Second Sight and Haze, I believe, right?
Yeah. So I think that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago or something. Mm-hmm. Although it looks to me like they're very shrewdly buying up a bunch of. They bought up Kingdoms of Amalur rights the other day as well. Which that was a good game.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I don't know what they'll do with it.
How do you feel about either remasters or new entries into the series?
I think it's good. I didn't like how it was kind of just dormant, because Crytek weren't doing anything with it. So I think that's good. It'd be nice to see even remasters, because people. It's harder to play those games now because you need to play them under emulation and stuff and things.
Mm-hmm.
I think for new stuff, it will be. I think it would be hard to make a TimeSplitters game that pleased all the TimeSplitters fans. A new one, because you've got there's a whole bunch of there's all the rose tinted glasses stuff, and I mean anything like that is always hard. And one of the things about the TimeSplitters game is that over the series of the 3 that we made, they just got bigger and bigger. So, but by the end of the last one, it had, I don't know, it's like 150 characters or something. That's a big ask to do with modern asset complexity and things. So, yeah. And then things like the map maker. I mean, I don't know whether they would even revisit that. I mean, the map maker was something that Steve and I were very passionate about, because we just liked the idea of creating authoring tools for users to build their own stuff. We thought it was the kind of thing that we would have wanted to have in a game.
Yeah.
That'll be again a hard thing to do. So I don't know. I mean, it'd be. Good luck.
But although the games that you're very well known for working on may have come out in the late 90s, early 2000s, the communities surrounding them are still, very active, especially with speedrunning. You've got GoldenEye as, a game that's speedrun a lot. And speedrunning, I think it's an amazing aspect of the gaming community, because games are appreciated in a very different way in that arena. I feel like.
I think with GoldenEye, I think we inadvertently made it a good speedrunning game because of the times in the levels, because it times the levels and we have timed unlocks for things. So it kind of invited speedrunning to some extent. And I mean, that's been. I mean, last year I kind of got in touch with him. There's a chap, Ryan White, who is a big. He's a kind of like granddaddy of the GoldenEye speedrunning community, and I had a couple of good chats to him over Skype. He just had loads of questions, about why can we do this? Why can't we do this? Why, and then I think they because they've been keeping records for so long, you just end up with these ridiculous things. So it was earlier this year. There was some record. There's a guy, Carl Jobs, or whatever, beat it on the dam, and it's like it's this 15-year record, and he just the guy just sat down and said, okay, I know this is possible to beat it, so I'm just going to lock myself in a room. And there's a lovely video, because he was obviously recording it all. There's his reaction video from when he did beat it, and he's just it's the joy in his face. He's just it's insane.
So you've got 20 plus years of gaming experience now. You've got a decorated resume behind you. Great games that speak for you and your teams that you've worked on, like the ability. How does it feel now, 20 years later, 10 years later, from your major releases?
The nicest thing is meeting people and them thanking, particularly GoldenEye. I mean, I've gone to a few retro gaming things, and people will come up to you and be genuinely, have genuine praise and thanks, and they because some childhood memory that they have was facilitated by something I did. I mean, I wasn't directly there when they were doing it, but it's a really nice thing to hear. It's particularly. I mean, although my role in GoldenEye was more to do with setting up single player stuff, it's the multiplayer stuff. It's when people come and say about all the fond memories they have of playing multiplayer with their siblings or relations or friends or whatever. And they're quite precious, formative memories. Mm-hmm. But somehow I have managed. That's an enduring thing there, which is a really, it's a very positive thing for me to take comfort from. Is that somehow I was involved in that for hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
It's that. Looking back on it now, I mean that part of it is much more interesting than any kind of financial reward or whatever. So it's nice to have done something that people liked.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things that really struck me when I reached out to you, and then I was doing research online. Is that you seem to be involved in the community when people have questions and want to chat with you. And I think that that's amazing because you have a lot of really great insight into the game, and you and Mark and Martin and everybody that was involved, not just you, but like everybody. I think that's what really stuck out to me, kind of as I didn't play GoldenEye personally a ton as a kid. I watched people play it a lot. I've always been like when it comes to shooters, even as a kid, I've enjoyed watching people play them. But I've never been practiced enough to be very good. I get real anxious with the first person view, even as a kid. But that really stuck out to me.
Well, I didn't play. I mean, I never really got online.
Mm-hmm.
I think I remember once playing. I think it was Gears of War when it came out, and playing it, but I was playing it with my brother, who we don't see each other that much, so it was a social thing with him, and it was funny because we were playing, and we were just getting completely creamed, both rubbish at it, but we were playing as a team and being rubbish, but just finding it really funny. I don't know what people thought, but but that it's come back. It's coming back. I mean, things like Switch is quite good for it, and a lot of PC stuff now. Mm-hmm. I just the social you can't emulate the social interaction that you get of people sitting together.
Yeah, that couch co-op is so good.
Couch co-op and just the trash talk and the whole. Yeah, it's my girls now are old enough to play something, and there's some things we play occasionally. I mean, they're not big gamers, mm-hmm. but some things play. But just the whole thing, no, why did you do that? Well, no, it was your fault. No, it was your fault. No, okay. Well, let's do it again. Oh, look, you've screwed up again. Right? Okay. And my eldest Molly, I mean, she'll beat me at Mario Kart now, which is although she can't beat me at SNES Mario Kart. So
Is she play? Do y'all play on like 300cc or one? Are y'all playing on the 100cc? That's a game changer.
It is. It is a game changer, but it's funny also that the kind of watching how I think we were playing it. Mario Kart 8 I think is great. It's great on the Switch. It's great on the Wii U and whatever. But I think we were looking at it the other day, and I was going, "Hey, hold on! You've unlocked all this stuff." So actually, even though I don't think you play it, you've probably put in, a good 50 hours or something, and that's probably why I'm getting beaten.
Do your girls know? Do they know that you've worked in games and you've created games? Have they been like?
Yeah, they do. I think they regard it as being a bit strange. They and I don't know. They're not really played. I mean, something like TimeSplitters, they'd enjoy playing it, but I mean, the controls are a little bit twitchy by modern standards and stuff and things. I think that they constantly are amused when their friends are more interested in it than they are. And they're like, they go, yeah, but he's a bit nerdy, he sits on his computer.
Have you ever had any of your girls' friends have played GoldenEye? I don't know if kids still play N64s very regularly.
Not so much. It's interesting how there's the kind of those old consoles have become quite collectible now. Because I think the thing is, if you get an old N64 and the cartridge and the electronics work, then you experience the game as it was intended. Because it wasn't something that was constantly updated with patches and DLC and stuff. It was you made the game and that was it, and it was a closed thing. Also, people like to physically collect things, so that's kind of gone now. You might have you have your Switch or your PS4 or whatever, and you have all the downloadable stuff that you've downloaded, but it's not tangible so a lot you see a lot. I mean, collecting is it's a strange human thing, isn't it? But people like to collect physical things and arrange them. So, you see people's pictures of their shelves of old console boxes and stuff and things. So there's and there does that whole retro kind of flea market thing is a thing, isn't it? And it's probably not something that's going to happen with anything post PS3 because there's no physical copy. It's and even if you get the physical copy, if the servers have gone or the downloadable stuff isn't available anymore, then it's gone. So you occasionally, I occasionally meet people who were probably now who weren't alive when GoldenEye came out, but they have copies of GoldenEye because they've decided it's a thing that they're interested in. So that's quite fun.
No, that's awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we finished up? I know thank you so much. We've been talking for almost 2.5 hours now.
No, not particularly. Okay. I mean, it's interesting you start kind of in the talking. I guess it's probably only in the last couple of years I've been more inclined to talk to people about the stuff. And also it's I in some ways I'd much rather you're saying you've got your podcast and stuff and things, and you're kind of, I was looking at the stuff you'd said about it, you're pretty much learning the history as you go along. I mean that's a much more interesting, for me that's a more interesting prospect, because you're more likely to be interested in quirky things about it. Because mainstream stuff is often again quite narrow.
Absolutely, and I just feel like people who have been in positions like yourself have, really interesting perspectives. You have the most honest perspective about the industry than anybody else can offer. In your experience and the games that you got to work on.
Well, I think people who are, it's like any industry. If you're active in it, then you're not really able to say what you think.
Absolutely.
Because there are repercussions. And I mean, in the time that I spent, I mean, we had things go wrong, we had things go really well, and things go wrong, but it's interesting because people, I mean, in my experience, people don't generally do malicious things. It's just that the kind of organisations or priorities that they find themselves engaging with often, they end up making mistakes which are harmful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not because they're evil. It's kind of interesting looking back on it.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, I believe that's really all of my questions.
Well, no way. A pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much, David. All right. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll have show notes for today's episode up on cakebites.com. Don't forget to like and follow the show on social media so you can keep up with updates, as well as on Twitch so you can get updates when I finally go live. And yeah, I think that's everything. See y'all next time.